Hello and welcome to one more episode of Give Me the Mic. So this is the second episode in this playlist, which is dedicated to my attempt to create a SaaS using totally no-code tools. If you don't know me, I am Samer. Everything I do on YouTube is about AI, technology, automation, no-code and low-code tools. And today in this playlist, I want to create my first ever SaaS using totally no-code, maybe a little bit low-code systems. So the system or tools I've selected to build the SaaS is basically Webflow for the front end, Xano for the back end, and Wized for running all these actions and requests between Xano and Webflow's front end. Now in the first episode I started with the user signup and we started with the Google Authentication signup. Now I've done only half of that part in that episode where we covered the Google init endpoint. The action I created basically generated an authentication token for us that we can use further in another endpoints like the Google Continue endpoint, where we can recover the user information from Google and basically place it in our own database. In today's video, we're gonna do two things. I'm gonna complete the work on the sign up and login for Google Authentication. So we're gonna add one more endpoint, and also we're gonna build the whole login and sign up for the users using email and password. Now today's episode is condensed. My aim is to put all the login and sign up stuff behind us, so the next episodes we can focus on actually building tool functionalities and bringing AI into the tool, and maybe at that time I can reveal my idea that I want to build my SaaS around. So the way I'm gonna go about this video is, number one, I'll just show you what pages we're gonna touch on Webflow, what you need to do. If you watched the first video, you probably know what to do, but I'll just highlight it again. And then I will go to Xano. I will show you the endpoints that we're gonna deal with. I'm gonna show you other things that you need to build your own functionalities, or if you want to just follow me along and replicate what I'm doing here, so you'll get the basics and you'll understand where I get my information from and how I go about it myself, so you can build it on your own. And last but not least, we will go to Wized, where I will show you all the steps that you need to follow to complete your Google Authentication login and sign up, and do the same for the email and password setup. Now I have everything built in Wized. I will just show you what I've built, showing you the important things that I guarantee if you follow my instructions step by step, you will have at the end of it an operating or working system for your logins and signups. So feel free to pause as you follow along, or you can go back in other sections in the video if you want to watch them again. And with this, let's get started. Okay, let's get started here. So I'm gonna remove my pretty face. Usually I have it and it becomes an obstruction. Today I'm gonna give you a full clean screen. So this is Webflow. And by the way, I'm still new in Webflow. I'm still trying to learn things. What you need to do for any element we interact with when it comes to dealing with Wized at later stages is we have to add the attribute. So if you see here, any element that we need, like the input here, we have added an attribute, and always the name should be Wized, and then give it a value. That value should be, as usual, what I recommend, something descriptive that when you see it on Wized, you will know what it refers to. So on Wized, whenever you highlight this attribute, it will highlight also on the demo or the screen, giving you the preview of the web page. So for my site, just to show you what I've done, so I have pretty much everything covered in terms of attributes. So even I have the labels done and covered, just in case I need them in the future to make something visible or not. So I have the email, I have the password, even I have the buttons, I have the checkboxes. So if we start with my web page here, you will notice that I have already managed all the attributes for all the elements that I will be working with today. The same goes for our login page. So if we move to the login page here, we're gonna get the same because I'm gonna need both pages. One more thing I've done is I added a log out button to my navigation pane because I want to also add a log out feature as part of my system. So I want today, by the end of the video, I want my system to enable users to sign up and log in using two methods. One is email and password, and the other one is Google Authentication, and I want to give them the ability to log out. And this is pretty much it for Webflow. So let's go to Xano. So if you remember last time when we set up the workspace in Xano, we've added some applications into our Xano workspace. So we've added the Google Authentication, which we started with in the last episode. We just in case added LinkedIn Authentication and Stripe checkout for future functionalities we're going to need, but we're not going to work with these today. Today, we're going to still complete what we've done with Google Authentication and then move to the default user endpoints that come from Xano. Feel free to go to the first video to watch how I set up everything, but the main things that I will repeat here that you need to always keep in mind whenever dealing with applications or API folders, if that's the right term for it, within Xano and endpoints is the following. The first thing is whenever you go inside the folder of an API, whenever you want or you need to set up something in Wized, and it will always demand that you create an application for it, and basically that application will require for the REST API something called a base URL. And this is what you copy from here in Xano. Just one click of a button, you get that URL. Now, any request based on that URL or that base URL, as they call it in Xano, you can later on just refer to the endpoints. By the way, they are covered here, and no need to cover the whole URL because in Wized, you already covered that part in the application definition. And when you do a request, the request will only include the endpoint as it looks here. Now, it's always smart to go into the endpoint that you're going to deal with and try to understand what is required in terms of inputs, maybe look through what's happening in functions and understand also what you're getting back as results. So for example, today we're going to work with the OAuth Google Continue endpoint. And if we go in, it's clearly a get method for this call, and it needs two inputs, a code and a redirect URI. Then we can look at the function stack, which is mostly related with the Google function stack, where it's getting a token, it's getting user information, things that you will want as part of this API call or this endpoint. And the response that you will get once this is done is a token, a user information name, and a user information email. So at a minimum, always understand your inputs and understand your responses, what you're getting back. Is it the thing you are looking for? Now, these things can be modified. You can add inputs, you can add functions, and you can basically even add a response. But be careful. This also depends, because here for this specific case, this is depending on Google and the client that we've created on Google Console. If you want more on that, refer to the previous video. But basically, when we create a client on Google Console, we have to define scopes for that client. And those scopes are the ones that appear for the user, telling them, be careful when you authenticate to this client or this application, this is the information you are sharing. Okay, before we move to the standard user sign up and login endpoints built by Xano, just remember this in the Google Continue endpoint that we need a code and we need a redirect URI. Now, if we go back, and then here we can go to the default endpoints that come with Xano. Now, in a similar fashion, we have the base URL here, which I already used to build an app for this standard authentication or sign up and log in with Xano. And then we have the endpoints. Now, these ones in the middle were added by Xano because I specified certain columns or data fields that I want in my database when I built the workspace. Again, if you want to see how that happened, go to the first video and watch it through. So these are the three endpoints we're gonna use when it comes to getting people to sign up and log in with an email and a password. We have the sign up, me, which is authenticate me, and then the login. Now we will need to work with the three of them. We will start with the sign up. So in the sign up endpoint, what you need as inputs, you need the name and an email and the password from user. This is the standard what you get with this endpoint. Now for my case, I also added two inputs I want, which are Boolean. basically true or false. One for accepting terms and conditions, if you remember the checkbox I had in my sign up page, and the other is for accepting marketing emails. When you do them and when you add them as inputs, you can also define if those are required or not. So for example, a term and condition, a type of checkbox, is required for a sign up. I want everyone who signs up to my SaaS to accept my terms and condition. On the other hand, the accept marketing one is just an optional one. You can opt in or opt out to receive such emails from my side. Everything else I kept untouched. In any ways, regardless of the inputs, what you get back out of the sign up is an authentication token, and we'll work with that later on. So let's go back and check the other endpoints. The next endpoint we're going to look at is authenticate me or auth me endpoint. Again, this is a GET request and it has no inputs. It's basically an API request that goes with the base URL. On top of that, there's the endpoint here, which is auth me, and what we get is the user information. Fundamentally, what this endpoint tells us, if the user exists, is the authentication token linked to that user already valid, or was it expired and we need to revalidate that authentication, which can happen in the sign up and in the login. So every time the first time the user actually signs up, they get authenticated, they get assigned an authentication token. We set in Wized the validity of that token. So we can ask for a token for a certain number of days, and it goes into record for that user. Now, when that user goes to log in, we always check that authentication. So if the token is authenticated, the user will remain on site. If not, if it expires, they will be again sent or re-navigated to the login page so they can re-authenticate their account. This is some of the security controls that are really flexible and you can do to what you think is necessary for your service or SaaS when you build things on Xano and Wized. Now, the last endpoint we're going to deal with here is the login endpoint. This one is post. Normally, when you log in, you need an email and a password. And as I mentioned before, when you log in, you get back an authentication token. The only other thing I want to show you on Xano before we go to Wized and we start showing the actions and the requests step by step for all of these good things that we want to build in our SaaS to control our users is the databases. So here I have in my instance 3 databases. Even if those don't exist and those are built automatically as you build your instance in Xano, which is super practical, you can build them on your own. You have to decide what are the fields, and the schema that you see here will be built for you. So do not worry about that. So let me take you to the user database. So this is my user database. So it has an ID. This comes as a unique identifier per user, a timestamp, a name, email, password. This is where the authentication token comes in. This is where the LinkedIn authentication, which we didn't set up, and so forth. The good thing that you should know about that already as this is built for us. So when a user signs up for an account on my SaaS, even me will not be able to see the password that they created here to authenticate their account. So this will be safe and secure for the users. And even from the back end, as the owner of the SaaS, I am not able to view this password. Okay, we will get back to this one again when we test our features for Google authentication and the username and password, so we can see how records are getting created, which means the runs were successful. And now, without further ado, let's go to Wized. One thing I just want to mention before we go into the detailed steps. So Wized create as a software, they create great videos on YouTube how to build some of these functionalities. When I had the idea to start building my SaaS, I used them a lot to actually learn on how to do things like the Google authentication and the user login and sign up. Now I have decided only to make videos about things not covered by Wized. Now the challenge with the videos that Wized put on YouTube is, and by no means this is a complaint for Wized, and I plan to build this SaaS and maybe future ones with Wized, Webflow and Xano. But sometimes I think they assume that the audience knows more than they do. I hit some roadblocks, even following their videos step by step. I went online, I found that so many others are having the same issues for both these topics, that they have covered things around authenticating with Google and building your sign up and login on YouTube. Those, number one, were based on the embed 1, so the old system of Wized, and not on Wized 2. And even for the ones that you think are highly relatable to how it works in embed 2, I faced challenges, and I think they missed critical simple steps that for no-code people, which I believe is their audience, their biggest audience, could stop or halt their ability to build things on Wized if they are not explained. So if I send a message to Wized, be more detailed in your videos, understand that your audiences are maybe less of developers as you think. And the other one is work more on your documentation on your website. That's one more thing sometimes I struggle to get my answers. Okay, so without complaining about Wized anymore, let's move on. Quick reminder here, you can always press the X-ray and to see all the attributes that, as we mentioned on Webflow, if you added those attributes, all of them should show here. So this looks that everything is built in and created successfully for me, and I can see that. Now remember, when you do those kind of attributes on Webflow, make sure to publish the website. And then if you're already on your Wized instance and it is already open, you can, from this part here, you can drop down and say reload canvas, or basically if just you're rescanning the attributes, just hit rescan attributes. And anything that you've added and published will show up on the screen once you do that. The fundamental embed 2 style of Wized builder are three elements: an application, request, and action, and there's a data store. So 4 things actually. I'm going to start with the Google Continue endpoint, and after that I'm going to move to the standard login and sign up. Last time we built the Xano Google Authentication app into Wized. Now if you click on it, it is simply a REST API, you give it a name, and then you write return, and then you put the URL for that base URL that we got from Xano. That's it, and you have an app working, right? So just not to come back to applications, I've also created one that deals with the standard sign up and login, the default folder that we've seen on Xano. So I copied the base URL and then I've pasted here. So you just say return, and then you put between quotations that URL, and you have an app working. So let's go to the important stuff. So let me start with the request that I created for the Google Authentication sign up completion, because we started with the init endpoint. Now we're going with the continue endpoint. Now, one good thing to start doing, which I didn't do last time, is create folders. So whenever you create a request or an action, you can basically add them to a folder, and it's intuitive. It's very easy to set up. So we have a new request. If you don't have already a folder, you can just click the plus button and have it, and you can create like a master folder, so you have a folder structure, so things will always be organized, because pretty easily those requests and actions will start stacking up, and you need to be really organized so you do not lose your way when you're on Wized interface. So I will close this because I don't need it for now. So we'll go for the user sign up Google Authentication. This is my folder, and I have only 2 requests. This is the request that we created last time, which is basically getting the authentication. We go back to Google with some information, and the authentication page will appear for the user. The user will authenticate for Google. Google will send us back a token. Now that token comes in the form of a code. So whenever you do any type of authentication, you will go to a URL which will have a code parameter. That code will be in the redirect URL that Google sends you to. Now, let me remind you here that one of the things that always generate errors when it comes to Google authentication, if you have a redirect URI different from the Google console to what you have here in Wized, it will not work. Even when we built the init, the URI link is the same what we had on the Google console setup for our client. The same goes for the continue. So when it goes for the Google Continue endpoint, which is the focus of this episode, we simply give it a name, place it in a folder if you have one, and then select the application we just created. For the endpoint, we copy paste the endpoint from Xano and we put it here between quotations and return parameter ahead of it. The method is get as per Xano. And if you remember, and you can go back, when we looked at that request or endpoint in Xano, we had two inputs, the redirect URI, which we figured out in the previous video in the Google console, and it's simply a link that we'll have to put in here. And the other one is a code. Now, as I mentioned, this code is something that the request, or basically later on in actions that we're going to create, is something that we pick up from the redirect URI in the actual URL that Google will send us after we authenticate in the init part. So the only thing you have to do here, and follow my actions or my steps in detail, and it will work smoothly for you, is code, and then here you just put return nParameter.code. Now, someone might ask, where do you get this nParameter code from? This is what I think Wized missed in their video. They didn't really tell us how to figure this out, and it didn't work in the way they showed it. So as usual, as we do when we have a problem, we go to Reddit, and I found someone who had the solution. So what is missing is we need to define this parameter, the n.parameter.code, as a variable in the data store. So if you go to the data store, you have to add it here. So you can see here is where I added mine. Now already built in, you will see an n.parameter, which already is highlighting the code attribute. This is the code that we're going to pick up. It will be a code with two dots like this, semicolon, and then the code will be after that, and this is how it's picked up. I tried to use this one, it didn't work. So you will have to create on your own n.parameter.code. To do that, you just click on the navigation variable. So you can see there's so many different things here. So you have standard variables, you have navigation, you have cookies, you have secrets, and so forth. Here you need to click on the navigation, and this tells Wized that this is something you're gonna pick up from a URL, I think, or I assume, but it's working. So if you want to add another one for any other reason in the future, you just click the plus button, you get a name, and then you can define it. The other thing you need to do or check if it doesn't work this way is you can add the parameter here. This is the canvas parameter, so you can click add, give it a name, and then give it a value. The value should be n.parameter.code. The name, give it whatever name you want, okay? Eventually, it should show up here like this. So let's go back to the request, Google continue. Now, if you do this right, this should run smoothly. One last thing to consider is when testing Google authentication in Wized, do not test it in the environment itself. For some reason, it doesn't work. You will have to basically go out in the preview, hit the preview, go to a live URL, do the authentication, and then it will work. You can test it if it's working or not. Here, it works in a weird way. You cannot test it, basically. Okay. Before I move to the actions for the Google Continue authentication, let me just do a quick test to show you the code in the URL. I'll hit preview, I'll go to the Google sign up, I'll click here. It will take me to the authentication page, click on one account. So I got the first redirect. Now I had to disable one action to show you this, because once you continue this, it will automatically get redirected again, just as part of testing. So let me change the view for you so you can actually see the URL. So, yep. So if you see the URL here on the top, you will see code equals so and so. You see this part which ends by the end. The part I highlighted is the code that comes back with the redirect. This is what we will need to actually run the continue request. So the init will give us this code, this authentication basically you can call it. We will take this and we'll use it with the continue with the redirect URI that will give us the user information. So it's a two-step process. When you test the continue, if you want to test it within Wized, you can do so, but you will have to copy this code, test the init part, copy this code, hard code it into the input for the continue request, and then run it, and you will get an authentication token, and you'll know that you're on the right track. Now let's go back to actually the actions that we need to build the continue request. Okay, So again, here you can paste that code that we've seen just now. You have the redirect URI and hit the run for this request, and you can see how it goes and what kind of authentication token you get back. Now, we need to put actions. Number one, to run the continue. We've already built an action to run the init by clicking the Google sign up, but we need to make sure that also the continue runs at certain conditions. And this is what I will show you now. So here in the actions, you can see already I have a folder structure in a similar way to what I have in the request. So this is the folder I have for everything related to Google authentication. So I drop down and I see all the actions. So these two here are ones we created for the init part in the previous video. You can go and watch that. Now, for the continue endpoint, we need 3 actions basically, and I'll just take you through them, show you what each entails, so you can replicate and build for yourself and test. So the first action, this is an event, and the event is when we have a code. So remember the code I showed you. So once we are in the navigator, redirected to the URL by Google after authenticating, and the URL has that code parameter, and we pick it up and it goes to our navigation variable I've showed you in the data store, then this condition is met. This is the trigger. We know we have authentication from Google. Then we go to the continue, because we do not want to send a request to continue while we don't have a code and we get back an error. So this is the first action we do. This is an action that will trigger and drive running the continue request that we've created. The second action is basically when the request finishes. So in the first one, we got a code, we ran the continue request based on that code and the URI, redirect URI. Now we wait for that response to come. So request finishes. Which request? We selected from the drop down. We already created that request, which is Google continue. And then here we have to put return and this parameter or this argument. Where do we get it from? Well, here on the right side pane, you can always look at all your requests. So here we have the Google continue request, right? You can go here, you test it. One of the good things you can do is, as I recommended before, take the code, the hard code, and just place it as it is in the code parameter and run the test on the continue and get back the responses. Now you will see that in the response you get results and stats or states, whatever you call it. So for one of the states you get is basically, okay, was it an okay run? And it's a true or a false. So here, true, this is the condition for this action. So what happens here, basically, we're saying once the endpoint request for Google authentication continue finishes, and if it's successful, so if it comes back with okay, and when we put it this way, basically we are looking for true, right? Then take the action. The action is navigate to another page. That page, for me, I selected one random page from my website template, just for me to know when I'm testing that the continue request finished. But there is one more thing we need to do before we finish this up. If you remember what I mentioned before, we need to get our authentication token. We need to create it and then we need to keep it. So when people log in, we will understand if they signed up and they moved to the login and the authentication token is valid, they can go to the website, use whatever features. If it's invalid, they have to re-authenticate if they're an existing user. So how do we do that? We go to the data store, okay, and I think by default you'll have a token that you can use and dedicate for the Google authentication, and you can give it a lifetime of days. So for me, I gave it a name of token. The C dot is basically just as to identify in the language the parameter, which is a cookie. I gave it a lifetime of 1 day. So basically, if you log in, use the website within that day, you can keep using the website. If you spend a day, after that day, the authentication will run out. So after 24 hours, basically, you'll have to log in again. Again, this is what I think is necessary for my website security. You can literally put it 360 days. So people can stay logged in for a year. Okay, let's go back to the action. So the last action is we want to store that authentication token. And this is the action. So again, it's an event. And when the request finishes, basically which request? The continue request. It's the same request. What is the condition? Here, well, I did it differently. you can do it the same way I've done before, which is check if it's okay. But also you can check if the status of the result is 200. 200 is a successful request. So you can do it either by the OK in the stat or by the result or the status of the result, which is 200 for successful action or call. Okay, once this condition is met, basically again it's successful, the action is set cookie. We select the cookie that we've created, and then we select it from the token here. Like we select the argument that we pick up from here and then add the token. Now again, you will not get this option from these variables here to select unless you have did the test with the hard-coded code in the continue request. You run it, you get the responses, and then you can select it. But anyways, if you don't have it, or if you just want to build it and have the full system working without testing here, you can do that, but you have to go here and in the result, select the one with data and add .token at the end. This will only be available when you actually do the test or actually do a successful run in the back end. It will happen, right? So, and by the way, it's very easy to do these things. So in this case, what you need to do is, let me just take the token part because I'm gonna still need to add it. So if we delete this, the whole thing, so let's say, you know, you want to add a token and you want to define the token. So when you find the token here, if you do the test, it will appear here as one of the options as the result. You simply click the result variable. Just click it and it will appear here. Now for our case, I mentioned because I didn't test now, so I need the token. So this is the token here and it should work properly this way. So you have everything built now for the continue. So let's finish off the continue so we can move on to the user setup. So let me go back to the preview. Now I will hit Google and you'll see two redirect. Okay, so I'll select an account and I'm logged in. And I'm logged out again. So, and I'll explain that later on. Again, something I built with the normal login for the user. So, but how do we know that it was successful? I know because these are the redirects I've built to make sure it's working. But also we go back to Xano, we go back to the database, we go to the user database, and you can see there's a user created with a Google Authentication ID, you have the email and you have the name. So it worked. Now notice that this user here doesn't have the accept terms and conditions, and it went through. I have to, in Xano, add this as an input and make it a required one. And it should be true. So if I add it as an input to the Google Authentication API call, and it doesn't basically appear in that call, it will not go through. So you can basically also build in whatever required input you need to do the authentication part there. Or I believe even within the Google console, you can have something just like written to basically people who accept or do the authentication, accept the terms and condition of your client that you created there, the app basically, or your company's terms and conditions. So that's something I would say minor to figure out later. So let's go back to Wized and figure out the normal login. So we're again on the sign up. So someone might want to do it all differently. Someone doesn't want to authenticate with their Google. They just want to put a name, an email, and a password and manage it on their own, which is fine. So we need to build the app, which I showed you earlier. You can go back and see that. So we take the base URL from Xano for the default folder for the endpoints, the default Xano endpoints, and we place it, return, and then we place the link basically as I showed you, and we have an app. Now, what requests we need there? This involves the normal setup. It's going to be a little bit confusing as I go fast through it, but do it yourself, build it within your own hands, and then just keep going through it step by step on your own, and you'll understand the logic. It is not complex when you spend time thinking about it, but for now, I want you to build it. This is the aim of this video, is build it quickly and smoothly with no issues and no errors. So this is what I will achieve. And if you have questions, you can always put those questions in the comment section, and anytime I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And maybe you give me other ideas for future videos around this. Okay, so let's go to the standard folder. So we have 3 requests and then we have 7 actions for this. So I will cover the requests first, and then we'll move to the actions as we did with the Google Authenticate. The first request, again, this is using the sign up endpoint, and it all is the same process, by the way. So you select the application. This is the application we've created. You give it a name. You can select a folder if you want to have some organization in your work, and then you add the endpoint, which we picked up from Xano, and we select the method, which as per Xano, it's a post method, right? And again, I will repeat this just for someone who didn't pick up and skipped my video so fast. Do not do that. It's a detailed one. So you hit return between the quotations, you add the endpoint URL. You don't need to put the whole URL again, as we mentioned before. In the body, if you remember, the standard endpoint for the sign up request required three things as per Xano: an email and a password and a name. And if you see here, I've added two other inputs as a necessity to run this request. So this is how you can modify these kind of endpoints and requests to suit your needs. So I'll tell you what didn't work for me in the Wized video that pushed me to create this part as well here. When they put the input for each element in the body, so, or each key in the body, so the email, they will hit return, and then what they used, and this is maybe a good note for everyone. So here you have always on the right panel all the details for all the requests that you have, so you can look through them if you want and see the parameters each have, so you can select them into your function editor. But also you have the general, and the general will pick up things from the form or the page you have displayed. So for example, here I want the input of the email. So I want basically this area here, whatever is put in here, I want to pull it into this editor section. Rather than, coding or figuring out how to write it, you will find it here. These are the input fields. Now, again, what I think Wized in their video did a little bit wrong, they were using the form. Now, it was the problem for me. I needed more. I didn't want just to limit myself with the email and password. This is what they have as options, standard options in the form. Or maybe this is my form as defined, but in their video, they had the same. Now, I want the name as well. And I want to know that if they accepted terms and conditions and if they opted in for marketing emails. All of them, when you do the attributes in Webflow, they will show as inputs here. You can see all of them here. So you put return and you select the one that is relevant to that key. So email, you hit email one. Password, you write password and then you hit password. All of these are keys, you name them, no issue here. This is the important one. You have to put return space and then what input that correlates with this key. So I've put all of them here. Let me just do the test for you because this is more local so I can test it. So if I put a name, I'll put my name here, Samer. I'll put Samer. I'll put a password. I'll call it Samer 12345667. I'll select the terms and conditions, accepting them. I'll hit sign up. And here you can see what I've gotten. What I've gotten is an authentication token. And you can see already it's saved in some authentication token that I created in similar fashion to the token we created for the Google authentication. So means it's working. Everything here is good and it's working. So that's the first request. We do the sign up. So I signed up this user, and to know that this is a successful one, if I refresh the database here, you can see the user created. This is samer@test.com. And look at the password. It's encrypted. I can't see it. Okay, so let's go back to Wized. So this is the first request. Now, the second is the get user endpoint. And this is what tells us, yeah, the user is there and this is their authentication tokens, valid or not. Okay, so what do we do in this one? If you remember, when we looked at it, you can go back in the video. That endpoint didn't have any inputs. So it is simply, again, we give it a name, we put it in the folder, we select the same default Xano app that we created for their default endpoints. We add the auth me endpoint, and then it's a get method as per Xano. And then simply it has a header. Doesn't have an input, it's a header. The header is an authentication and it's the authentication token. Where did I get that from? Well, if you go back, now this is one I can show you because I did the test. So if I go back to the create user, I have the authentication token here. Well, for some reason it went after the test. So the authentication token is what we want to provide in that request for the get user. What do we get back? We get back the user information. Now I'll show you really why this fits in really well, the get user endpoint in the actions later on. So we need something between just simply a sign up and a login. Now let's go back to the login. Again, similar fashion. We use the same app, give it this a different name. We give it the endpoint from Xano, which is a login endpoint. The method here is a post for this one. And then the body has two keys or two inputs, an email and a password. Where do we get them from? It's good that we are here on the login page. We get them from the general, and we go to the inputs. See here, those are the inputs associated with this page. There are three: the button, the password, and the email. So for the email, we just need the email, and the password, we need the password. We only need those two. I used last time samer.com, and I put the password as samer123456 I guess. Let me try to log in. And if you remember, similar to what we've done in the Google authentication, once a successful kind of authentication or login, we go back to the integration page. Now there's a reason why in that test it logged out that you will see now in the actions. But basically we created a user and we logged in based on that user, and that got authenticated. Okay, that's good. Now I want to show you something in advance. So in actions, I'll just go faster so you will not be really bored with hearing my voice. I've created this logout button. So this template didn't have a logout button. I wanted to do a logout, which I'll explain how it happens later on. But basically here, you can hit now logout and you'll go back to the login page again. So we have that functionality as well. In terms of requests, everything is clear now. We need the three endpoints, we need to build them, and it's very easy, very clean to build them. Now let's go to actions. Now in actions, again, I have the folders. I have the folder for the standard login and sign up. And here we have 7 actions. Some might be confusing, but build them, rewatch the video, go back and forth in the sections where it matters. If you build them and you're testing and it's working successfully, keep looking at the details of each action you've built, and you will start grasping the logic of how these things work. You can see here that even the way I name my actions helps me navigate them better. So I have, even I link them to the video I created, and then I link them to the sequence, somehow a logical sequence that is required just for my brain to work well when I look at those actions. Be careful. Someone might think that those names are not effective in the sense that if you change them midway, it will not affect other things. Well, I went into that issue. I made that big mistake. In many arguments, especially in actions, you'll find yourself referring to outputs or stats of actions and their names. So if you change a name, everything else will break down. So give it a name, stick to it. If you have to really change it, do, but check whenever that action was mentioned in other subsequent actions or requests that it is referred to properly. Now, some of these elements happen through a drop-down, so you don't need to worry about that because it will automatically update. But whenever it's in the editor, where basically you have to put return and then code or whatever parameter you have to put in that code, there you have to do it manually. Okay, so let's start with the first one. The first one is submit the sign up. So someone has to click the button. So let's go to the sign up page quickly. That's the sign up page. Okay, we are on the sign up page now. This is an element type of action. Okay, and it applies to the sign up button. So you see, when you just hover over the attribute here, it automatically highlights that attribute on the preview page in the builder, in the Wized builder. So just, you're referring to the right button. Okay, what is the action? It's an event. On the event of clicking the button, we need to perform a request, and what that request is, the request is I called it create a user, which is basically the sign up endpoint of Xano, the standard endpoint for signing up a user that we already built. Okay, so we now have one action to run that endpoint. So we have the information here. Someone clicks the button, the user is signed up and created. We get back an authentication token if you've seen. Now we need to do something else after that, right? So let's go for the next action. So the next action is again in an event. So what is that event? That event is a request finishes, and the request is the create user, which is the sign up endpoint request is done with. What do we do when it's finished? We need to set a cookie. So that authentication token, we need to save it, we need to assign it to a cookie. Now, this is the cookie I created for this one. It's called authentication or auth_token. If you don't have it, you can add it here. Where do we pick up that authentication token? In the same way we did for the Google authentication. Here, the name is auth token, okay? So even if you didn't run the test, you will simply go to the create user, and here you'll have data. Again, it's null. If I run it, I should get the authentication token. Click the data and then add .auth token, and it will be working. Now, what is the action? Again, someone just signed up. The action is to navigate them to the login page. This is what I've done. Now we've saved the authentication token. We've assigned it to our token. Now there's another action we want to do, because someone just signed up on the form. We need, as we saw just now quickly in the demo, we need to send him to the login page so they can log in. And this is what we do. So we can add an action always, and by clicking this button here, the action is navigate to what we put in the editor, in the function editor, is basically return between quotations. We put the URL of the login page, and then we can put a condition, and this is the condition that it is okay, successful. I've already explained that. You can go back how you do this, but this just the redirect part will only happen if the sign up is successful. So let's say in the sign up they didn't check the accepting terms and condition. This will come back as a failure, so they will not be redirected to the login, and we confuse the user. Next action is the login. So we have someone who signed up, then we got his authentication token, saved it, then redirected that user to the login. Now they need to log in to their account. So this action, again, it's an element. They need to click login. This is the button. You see, we hover on it, it shows. The event is a click, and then perform a request. The request is the request that we created, which is a login user, which is basically the authentication login endpoint, standard one from Xano. Now, notice here that we selected prevent default. I will not go into it. If you watch the Wized video, it will explain this. There is documentation about it. But basically, if we prevent default, this will prevent other actions that we might build in the future that could stop this process. I didn't really get it, honestly. Watch the Wized video. If you understand what it means and why we have it here, please write a comment in the comment section. Educate me. So what do we do after this? So someone put their email, put their password, hit login. So what do we do after login? We go to this action. So this is an event that happens when the actual login request finishes. What is the action that happens after this trigger is identified? Well, as I mentioned early in the video, in the sign up, we create the authentication token, we keep it, and even after each login, we keep that authentication token as we defined it to the period it survives. So if you remember, for the Google authentication token, we put 1 day. I think for this one, for the normal user login and password, I put 7 days, for example. Now, here, again, the same way, we have to select this argument from the login, not the sign up this time, from the login user request, and add at the end auth token. If you do the test yourself, you can put an email and a password, run the test here, and you get the authentication. For me, again, it will not work as happened before in the test, because it will be redirected. But for you, as you are building step by step with me, you will get the authentication token here, so you can just click it. So the other thing I want to happen is I want to navigate the user to another page. So a user logged in, I use just a random page from my website template on Webflow. It's called integrations, but basically it could be your user account. So you take that URL, you put it here. Is it conditional? Yes, it is conditional as well. I do not want a user to go to a user area without making sure that this request was successful. So that's why we make sure by just putting a return and the stat is okay. Or you can even use the result part after testing. You'll see it if it comes back as 200, but you have to check that. But to be on the safe side, just do what I've did and use the OK part. Now we'll move into the get user endpoint actions, and it will make some sense as I take you through each action and how we use that request. So the first one here, this is just an access control measure. So whenever we perform a get user request, that request is finished. What we do, the action is we need to navigate them to the sign up page only if this condition is met. And this condition is that get user is back as a failure request. And you see the only difference here, I've added this exclamation mark, and this basically reverses the request. So if I remove it, it will redirect the user if there's a success. And imagine a user logging in successfully and then getting redirected to sign up. So add the exclamation mark here, and basically this will reverse the logic. And this is what we want. If at any moment a get user request is finished and it is a failed request, so basically the status of OK comes back as false, we want to redirect the user to sign up. Why? Because that means the user does not exist. Now let's go to the next get user related action. This one is a custom condition type of action. It's an event. So again, all of them are built the same way. You give it a name, you put it in a folder, you select the type. This one is an event, and this is a custom condition. Again, this is some kind of access control. Every time someone goes to, for me, I put into the integrations page, I want to check the user, because that's a critical page that is only reserved for users. So what do we do here? The action is perform a request. What's the request? Get a user request. So this way I ensure that certain pages, even if are on my website and maybe have links on my website, they will only be accessible to users only. So if someone goes, the way I defined it myself here is end path ends with integration. That's my page. Now there's so many arguments you can look up through Wized on this one. So you can put something that starts with or ends with. So starts with, it's good to use it if you have a whole folder reserved only for users. So there's many ways to write these arguments. You can specify even a specific URL or a number of URLs here. So that is something very easy to do. But every time those pages or those locations on your website are accessed by anyone, you would want to check a get user for that person to check if they are an existing user or there's an authentication token for that user or client. If not, redirect that user through the action we just covered to the sign up page. And now the last action, but not the least action, action number 7, which I mentioned before and I tested it before, is the logout action. It's a very simple action. It's an element type of action. The attribute is the logout button. You can see it shows when I hover over it here. It's an on event. When you click, what do? It's simply setting the cookie, the same cookie we've created for the user authentication through the standard login with an email and password. We set it to a blank. It will push the user out of the website into the sign up page again. So this is the action you add as well here. So navigate back to the login page if you need, if the user actually clicks the logout button. So with this, you have a whole system using Google authentication and the standard user login with an email and a password to manage your user access and access control of your SaaS and website. So I hope you've enjoyed the video and you've seen all the steps very quick. I had to condense it this way. Go back to the video, pause to follow the actions, but you've seen as we tested along the way, all of that functionality is working. Users are registering in the database and we are able to log in using those users and the authentication that we created for them through the cookies. From this point on, we will focus on actual fun stuff, actual functionalities into the SaaS, which is something around CVs and finding a job. I have nothing to do with HR, but this is something I feel is a problem out there. I have no study to support that this idea is working. This time I'm building the SaaS for the sake of learning how to build the SaaS, through no-code tools. So join me and watch me crash and burn probably, and no one registers to this SaaS. Or just watch me succeed and flourish by basically getting really lucky and winning the lottery. So don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel. This helps me a lot. If you don't like the content so much, you don't want to subscribe, write me a comment in the comment section. How can I improve? I will definitely do that for you. And before I go, I will put 2 interesting videos here and here for you to watch. Thank you and goodbye.